Well, let's go all the way back to the beginning, to the time before there was any writing at all. Now, this is very difficult for us to imagine what an oral culture is like, a totally oral culture, where nobody can write and nobody has even thought of the possibility of writing. In a culture like this, remember, nobody has ever looked up anything. When anybody was born, when anybody died, what belongs to whom, when anything happened. In fact, they don't have the idea of looking up. See, remember to look up something, that means you know how to read and write. All they can do is recall. They can just say it again. See, in Homer's Iliad, which after all is a poem for entertainment, there are over 400 lines which give you the names and number of followers of the captains of the various Greek ships. This is like the city directory. But you couldn't look these up. They couldn't write. If you wanted to hear them, you had to bring in one of these singers and have him sing them to you. You had to recall it. In that kind of culture, in which maybe most of the world still lives, more or less, in that kind of culture, if you don't know something, you ask somebody. If he doesn't know, you maybe ask somebody else. When you run out of people to ask, that's the end. Nobody knows. There's no way to find out anymore until you become literate, and then you work back and figure it out a little bit. Some of it, anyhow. In this kind of culture, you cannot have any kind of scientific treatise. You cannot talk like I'm talking. There's no way, for instance, to have, nobody has ever given any kind of treatise, produced any kind of treatise on medicine. There's no way to do it. Imagine a treatise. All you could do would be to stand up and recite a book. Nobody can do that. What do you have? The closest thing you can get to a treatise in that kind of culture is a series of aphorisms. Feed a cold and starve a fever. The early bird gets the worm. Ars longa vita brevis. Longfellow puts it in his not too good poem. Art is long and time is fleeting. That's the first aphorism of Hippocrates. That's the earliest medical writing we have in the West. And it's a series of aphorisms. All you've got is sayings. You can't make a list of them. Nobody can remember them in the right order. Remember, don't forget that in oral cultures, although these people have fantastic memories, it's never verbatim. No oral culture in the whole world, so far as we can tell by massive surveys, it can recite a thing, say, as long as the Nicene Creed verbatim. They're absolutely incapable of it. They can tell you the story accurately, they can use formulas, but every time they tell it, it'll be a little bit different. So, when you get writing, something happens. Once you get writing, you can write a thing that we would call a treatise, something like Aristotle's Art of Rhetoric, which is a scientific approach to oratory. What can you say about oratory scientifically, about communication? For persuasion, scientifically. He puts it down. Or you can write a treatise on medicine, or a treatise on forest trees. But this means that when this kind of treatise is composed, this is a completely new experience for the human mind. No human mind had ever gone through that kind of motion, where you show that this is due to this, and this is due to this, and this is due to these three factors, and each of those are due to these four others. You can't do that in an oral culture. You can't get them lined up like that. You can't have this linear or causative development to any extent. You can get a little bit. You say, he pushed me and I fell over. Well, that's causality, but you can't construct a link of more than 2 or 3 chains and retain it. A chain of more than 2 or 3 links and retain the connections in your mind. So that these scientific type treatises, the kind of writing that we normally do, were a completely new experience of human mind. Nobody had ever thought those thoughts. But then once they had thought them, and thought them out in writing, written them down, what happened to speech? When people invented writing, did they stop talking? Of course not. First of all, the people who invented writing were the ones who talked most. Writing was invented by people in urban settings, not the nomadic hunters or the herdsmen or the farmers, but people who lived in urban settings. It was really invented not at all for literary purposes in the aesthetic sense of that term, but for record keeping. That's why it was first invented. People were living close and they had to keep records. So it was invented by the people who were in close together and talking more. I am sure that after they had writing, they talked more than ever because they had more to talk about. But did they talk the same way? No. Once you had treatises such as Aristotle's Art of Rhetoric, or a treatise on surgery, or a treatise on logic, once you had experienced this kind of orderly organization of thought, you could talk that way a little bit. You could make your talk sound a little bit like writing because you'd heard that. You knew what it was like. And you'd better do it or you wouldn't get along in the world. Because if you couldn't make your talk sound like writing, you weren't educated. And if you couldn't make it sound like writing, you really couldn't think. In the advanced kind of way that writing made it necessary to think, in this scientific kind of way. So you see what's happened here is that the new medium, writing, has reinforced the old. It's made talkers talk more, but it's made them talk differently. And that's what always happens when a new medium comes in. It never wipes out the old, it always reinforces it. But it changes it so that it no longer does what it used to do the same way. So you have to know the new medium or you can't use the old. The same thing happened with print. When did it become necessary that we have universal literacy? Not after writing was invented, but after print was invented. Universal literacy became necessary after the Renaissance. Once you had print, everybody didn't have to be able to print, but they had to be able to do the thing that went before print, to write. And once you had print, people wrote more than ever, because they not only wrote letters now, but they wrote books for print. And these could be disseminated more. A lot more communication took place in print. So you directed your writing toward that. But print changed writing. Earlier writers used to write either in a dialectical form, an argumentative form, or they used to get up collections of sayings. You see, until Romanticism, roughly, because print took its effect slowly, until the late 1700s, all teaching was by combat. It was a contest, a battle. You were never taught to be objective. You could become objective, but what you were taught was to take a stand and to defend it, or to attack the stand the other person took. If you go to the Vatican Film Library at St. Louis University, where we have all those 13 million pages of microfilm from the Vatican Library, there are a lot of those pages come from the university milieu. And you'll find there medical theses that a doctor defended. This is the way you got your medical degree. This disease is cured by this remedy, and you defended that against everybody who wanted to attack it. Now you prove things by writing. They had never thought, of writing in the Middle Ages to find out how much you knew. They thought apparently it never occurred to anybody that you could find out how much a person knew by asking him to write. That came much later. They were very oral from that point of view. But you taught and thought in a dialogic form, a back and forth, an argumentative form. And when you made collections of things, if you look in early encyclopedias, the encyclopedias tend to tell you what people say. They're collections of sayings. Once you get print, though, something happens. With print, you can have indexes that really work. Now, you can make indexes of manuscripts. Some of you are making manuscripts right here. You're taking notes. That's a manuscript. Manuscript's some writing material with writing on it. And if you have people copying out manuscripts in a medieval monastery with a monk up here dictating it, everybody out here copying it, you could make an index for each one, but you'd have to have a different index for every copy because the stuff isn't all on the same pages. Each copy, the pagination is different. But once you get print, when you've got 2, 3, 4, maybe 5,000 copies with everything exactly on the same place on the same page, then it's really, really helpful to have an index. You can spend a few days on this, and it's a great aid to everybody. And sure enough, Within 100 years or so after print is invented, you have book titles and they advertise cum indice locu platissimo, with a very complete index, with a revised index, with 2 indexes, 3 indexes, with 4 indexes. They put this on the title page. Now note what this does. This changes our idea of what knowledge is. Because we think of books as things that have labels on the back, which we call titles. And they have things in them, and you can look up and find where those things are with the index. And consequently, a modern encyclopedia, it comes to us as, or we think of it, or likely to think of it, as a mass of facts, as though nobody said them. But you know, an encyclopedia is just something that some people say. It can be true or not. Most of it is quite true. But it's still something that somebody says.